Great. Thanks everybody here. Okay, thanks everybody for being here. My camera's not working, so you won't be seeing me, but you'll be hearing me. I'm going to call to order the Wednesday, August 25, 2021 meeting of the GM Oversight and Performance Management Committee. I'll take the roll quickly. Busick is here. Vice Chair Sloan. I see you, but I didn't hear you, so I'll take it as a yes. Director Lewis. Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Deshell.
Here.
Chair Rivera Malpiedi.
Here.
Director Bouquet.
Present.
Okay, so we've got all present with the exception of Directors Lewis and Deshell. If they pop in, someone let me know them is present. So,
Director
okay, let's start our agenda. I'm sorry.
Music up here.
Oh, Director Shell. So good.
Deshell, yeah.
Thanks. Okay,
Paul
so.
on line two.
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. You're right.
It's all good.
Any others also here? Any other directors that I'm missing?
Shelley Cook is here.
Yeah. Okay. Saw you there. Thanks, Shelley. Okay, so let's just get the ball rolling. I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Esch and his team to talk about the rest of the agenda, which has to do with the Net Promoter Score survey questions, sampling process, the GM survey validation plan, compensation analysis overview. So, Mr. Esch,
So, Director Busick, if I may indulge and actually introduce the item in such a way with the additional people, sir.
Thanks, General Manager Jess. Please go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So basically for all that assembled, Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. This afternoon, we have TransPro that are with us, and basically in recognizing that we have an adopted strategic plan of which you took action on August 10th. Some of the preliminary elements in ensuring that this plan comes to fruition in the sense that we can effectuate it boils down to establishing baseline understanding of where we stand as it relates to our strategic priorities, primarily as we look at our community value and additionally as relates to customer excellence. Some time ago during the course of having a conversation with this body assembled here today, we had a conversation that ensued relative to ascertaining how will that come to fruition. In the course of moving forward, we collectively acted on a recommendation put forward by members of the General Manager Oversight in the sense of basically garnering an understanding of how we get there. One thing that's important to note, I have talked about ad nauseum in addition with the chair, where we talk about the importance of going to where the people are, and that came to fruition during the course of leveraging a discussion of our road to recovery back in May during the course of actually talking about being empathetic to our customer pain points. So with that, the TransPro team, which is headed up by Mark Ash, but specifically we'll be hearing from Chris Browning and Jason Pearl, who have been working in tandem with our market research staff, and we have Palmer O'Neill that's present to orient you about the process that is mainstream relative to seeing how we stack up to other entities from a customer service vantage point. In turn, while we do have demarcated on this agenda that there would be a GM survey validation plan, this is all incorporated in the presentation, which they will put forward. That's customary when you leverage something of this caliber, using a third party going forward to do the engagements that intercepts as I prescribed a few moments ago. So with that, I thank you for your attention. And now I will yield the floor to Mr. Ash to formally introduce his team members who are quite capable in this area of market research. Thank you very kindly for the opportunity to introduce.
Thank you kindly, Madam CEO. And I'll just add 3 quick points. So it's very much a yes and, so beautifully set up. As part of the strategic plan, which the board recently adopted at the CEO's recommendation, there were 4 outcomes by which you are evaluating the performance of the organization. We're here today to talk about 2 of them, customer satisfaction and community value. The second point that I would highlight to the board as you're listening to the presentation is the process that we utilize with clients nationally is distincting between customer service, which are the inputs that the management team employs to drive the outcome of customer satisfaction. So the presentation you're going to see today is how we measure customer satisfaction. And it really is the third point that I would make, is how you empower your customers to pick and prioritize the elements of service that are the most important to them to drive their satisfaction level, that higher net promoter score, by which you're evaluating your CEO. The board thinks about the net promoter score, whereas the customers are empowered to identify which elements of service drive that experience for them. So with that, let me turn to Christopher Browning from our team, who actually leads this work nationally with other agencies, and how you'll be able to use the results specific to RTD, both to evaluate your CEO, but also to be able to compare customers to yours against the industry as a whole. Christopher.
Thanks, Mark. Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. You all can see my screen, correct? Just want to confirm that before I move forward.
We
Yes.
can I suggest you put it in slideshow mode, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as Mark said, I'm Christopher Browning. I'm with Transform, a principal with the firm, and I've led numerous projects around the country around customer satisfaction and community value. And our role today here is to walk through this process with you all as we've established in a national capacity, and how we can bring this same thinking to the Denver community as well. As I said, we've conducted this work around the country in communities such as Austin, Charlotte, Las Vegas, Tampa, and others, in a way that really helps us understand what is the baseline for these communities, and then how can we improve in a consistent methodology. And today I'm going to walk through these areas as you see on the screen. We'll walk through a little bit of context and background that both Madam CEO and General Manager and Mark alluded to. Talk about the process that we use, the instrument design, the sampling methodology, so how we come to survey the number of people that we do, the analysis and recommendations after the survey is completed, and then ultimately the overall project timeline. So as we've already heard this morning, this afternoon, the board unanimously adopted a strategic plan on August 10th. Two of those areas of highest importance, the strategic priorities, are community value and customer excellence. So as we think about how do we measure that, your CEO began a process to implement information systems to identify how we're going to measure those outcomes. So as the board is focused on that outcome level, what's the most important thing in these four areas, the outcome that the board seeks to understand, is how is the management team going to actually deliver that? In this case, two information systems that are put in place are for these two surveys: the customer survey, the customer experience survey, and the community value survey. Ultimately, where both of these will lead in this current edition is to establish the baseline. So as we think about both the performance of the agency and measuring the performance of your general manager, it's establishing the baseline today so that a year from now we have something to compare it to. There's a kind of a four-step process that we use as part of our survey tool. We develop an instrument, and that is a industry standard instrument that we use so that we can compare your agency to others around the country. We use our sampling methodology and survey execution in a way that's independent and make sure that it's statistically valid, so that there are clear understanding of what's available and what the impressions of the community and the customers are true. Third, as we think about the results and analysis component, so again, we take the results and what are the industry, how do you all compare to other industry transit agencies? What does that look like? And then lastly, taking the results, the industry benchmarks, and what are some clear actionable recommendations that the management team could think about and incorporate into the operations to drive change and increase the outcomes that the board seeks to have. So I'll move into the first piece of the process, and that's the instrument design. I'm going to narrate this in a two-piece capacity. I'll start with the customer excellence survey on each of these sections and follow up with the community value survey. Excuse me. In this particular case, the instrument is consistent with our other agencies so that we can benchmark RTD's performance and impressions against others in the transit agency. We've also worked with your market research team to make sure that we're focused on the right questions here so that there is consistency with previous surveys that have been done on the customer side. We capture key demographic information as we think about our population and make sure that we have a multilingual approach to ensure that all of our customers are able to participate in the survey. One of the most important components, as you all have identified in your strategic plan, is an outcome around the Net Promoter Score. The Net Promoter Score, founded in about 50 years ago was created by the Harvard Business Schools to really measure loyalty in service industries. So what is the ultimate loyalty question? It is, how likely are you to recommend using RTD services to a friend or neighbor? And there's a calculation behind that. We asked the question on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend using RTD services to a friend or neighbor? Anyone whose answer is a 9 or a 10, as you can see on the right-hand side, is a promoter. They're people that are very loyal and are willing to recommend. In the middle, you have your passive, folks that are customers that may say, maybe, maybe not. And then you have on the left-hand side from 0 to 6, you have your detractors. And those customers are against the service. We calculate the score, the Net Promoter Score, from the percent promoters minus the percent detractors. And that gives us our NPS score. And that score can range from anywhere from a negative 100 to a positive 100. There are agencies that excel at this. You think about the Costco's, the Disney's, the Apples of the world, who just have a powerful NPS score in the 70s to 80s. On the flip side, you have organizations that have terrible NPS scores, Net Promoter Scores, such as internet service providers or banks, again, those that have a disloyal customer base. And in the middle, for reference, the industry sampled average for transit agencies is 34%. Mr. Chairman, I see a hand up. I just want to make sure that I'm responsive. Would you like me to take questions throughout, or would you like me to continue through?
Yeah, let's take them throughout. I think it might help if there's a question on this, so they won't forget the question. So Director Catlin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Christopher, I just am curious why the range of detractors is so big, the range of positive or whatever, this is the previous slide, the promoters is small, and then the neutral or the passives is rather small. I just was wondering why the detractors is such a broad range. And I'm not an expert at all in this, but my instincts would tell me that you would have more passives in that middle range, and then have, maybe 3 or 4 in the detractors. That I just was curious how that plays out. And then the second part of my question is, you have percent of promoters minus percent of detractors. Are those weighted? So for example, if you have a lot of zeros, does that weigh more heavily than if you have 4s or 5s? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Director Catlin, to your first question, this is an industry standard. We didn't create it. Harvard Business School did. So the reason, my understanding is that there is a heavier weight on those that are against your service, and that takes away the bias from potentially overweighting on the positive side. So it weights against you just a little bit, but it makes sure that the customer really is passionate and is loyal to your service. So that's why those passives and promoters are such a small component of that. And to your second question, the scoring is not weighted. So a detractor who indicates a 0 is the same weight as a detractor who indicates a 6.
If I might, just to follow up to that, I fill out these surveys for other industries regularly, and when I fill them out, if I do something on the 4, 5, or 6 range, that means I'm relatively passive in my mind, and that's just why I asked the question. So I'd really be interested to see see some of the logic behind that, I guess. I'm not doubting it, and I appreciate that you're using the industry standard. I'm just really kind of curious how that Harvard study came about with those numbers. So thank you.
There's a terrific book on the topic, which people like me enjoy. There's a book called The Ultimate Question, and to the point, I would want to be clear for the board's benefit that this isn't unique to transit. This is for service industries. So Ritz-Carlton uses this, restaurants. It was built at Harvard back in the 60s, but there's a great book. I was actually looking at my bookshelf to see if I had it here, called The Ultimate Question, built by the Harvard team that, written by the Harvard team that designed this. And so again, not unique to transit and certainly not ours, but it's the model that is used for service industries globally.
Thanks, Mark. I wrote that down. That's helpful.
Yep, The Ultimate Question.
Does that answer your question, Director Catlin?
It sure does. Thank you.
You bet. Director Deshell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question may be more appropriate for General Manager Johnson, but if I recall our sort of board conversations correctly, the concerns that we had for the market research team were sort of twofold. But there were concerns about methodology, which Christopher, it sounds like you addressed, but there were also concerns that I and it sounds like others had about our ability or inability to get a sizable sample, statistically valid sample, and to get people to actually answer those questions. Is that included within your guys' scope, or Ms. Johnson, how are we addressing sort of the full?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Right ahead.
So Director Deshell, upcoming in the presentation, we will speak to that. We're going to ensure that we do a sampling that is reflective of our ridership. It may take some time, and we have strategies that we will employ. One thing that I will speak, having worked at other transit agencies, we did leverage multitude of different ways so we can ensure that we are getting the accurate voice as we look at going about this. And I don't want to take any of Christopher's thunder, but as I said before, we're going to go to where the people are. So we will frame it around that. And if in fact Christopher gets to that slide and your question isn't answered, I'll be more than happy to delve deeper in. So with that, I will yield the floor back to Christopher if there are no more questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, thank you, Ms. Johnson. So now I'd like to turn our attention to the community value survey. So it follows the same pattern where we want to understand the perception of the value that RTD brings to the community in a number of different areas. So what's the perception there? And as you think about that, we want to make sure we're talking to the investors of RTD. It's the entire community. It's not just the people who ride. It's not just the people who don't ride. So we want to make sure that we're delivering measurable value to the entire RTD community and service area. And so we do that using this survey. Again, we capture key demographic information and we ensure that it is accessible to multilingual populations as well. One of the ways that we ensure on the community survey, because it is such a large population area, we want to make sure that we're talking to since we're focused on customers in the customer satisfaction survey, the customer experience survey on the vehicles. When we do the community survey, we will talk to everyone, but we also want to make sure we're capturing those who are both aware of the RTD system and the public transportation service, as well as those that whether they use the service or do not. And that allows us to understand that for those that are aware of the service but do not use the service, we'll have one set of answers, and those that have an awareness and do use the system have another set of answers, and we're able to look at those in tandem. And that, again, is something for the management team to use as it thinks about how it wants to reach the community, really display and deliver the message of the community's value. So ultimately, as we think about both the customer excellence survey and the community value survey, we start with core questions facilitating industry-wide benchmarking. So again, allows us to compare RTD to both itself as well as other transit agencies around the country. The instrument is informed by the strategic plan and the scorecards that were created as a part of that process by the management team. And ultimately, the findings will allow us from multiple survey waves to drive improvement and change on the operational side to deliver greater value and greater level of success around the outcomes. I'll move on. I'd like to move on next to the sampling methodology, the second part of this process. And the way that we define a sample is it's a standard practice about how to draw conclusions from a broader population. And the customer excellence survey and the community value survey are similar in nature. They each have their own distinct populations. So the distinct population for the customer excellence survey is the ridership, everyone who is a customer of the service. On the community value side, it is everyone within the service area. So it's making sure that we understand who the population is. And then we gather a subset of that population. So we use a statistically valid sample size of that population. And I'll talk about each one of those in just a minute. Focusing on the fixed route and rail customer experience surveys, how we've executed this nationally and the model that we'll use here for RTD is, one, we weight the survey based on how your customers use the service from a both day and time perspective. So as we think about who the customers are, where they're riding, and when they're riding, that's what we use to define our survey methodology. Second, we talk to customers on the vehicles. So whether we're on the bus, on the fixed route side, or on a rail car, on the other side, or on a train, we get on the vehicle, our surveyors get on the vehicle to talk to those customers. We use a third party survey team. So Transpro oversees all of the modes of survey, but we have other people going on. So there's a separation even between Transpro and who's collecting the surveys to ensure that independent data collection. Thirdly, we intercept every fourth customer. So we get on the vehicles, we intercept the customer, and our surveyors talk to every fourth customer to prevent bias. So that means that if the fourth person to get on the vehicle chooses not to take the survey, we wait for the next fourth person to join the vehicle, to enter the vehicle before we ask them to participate in the survey. And that really allows us to have the understanding that this is free of bias, and and there's clarity around how we're sampling. One of the things that we've talked about as a part of this process is establishing baselines. And in staying in the customer experience survey realm, your CEO would ask us to also conduct a baseline for the paratransit system in addition to the fixed and rail. So this one looks about the same. It's a very similar survey. Because the agency knows who all of the paratransit customers are, we use your data, we use your customer list, and we randomize that list and do the same thing where we reach out to the customer, we call the customer, to make sure, and we talk to either the customer or the personal care assistant to ensure that statistical validity as well. And we for paratransit specifically, due to the population, we do administer these surveys over the phone via during service periods on weekdays, so that they know, they can be aware of that the surveys are coming.
Christopher, if I may, Mr. Chair, Director Sloan has her hand raised.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Vice Chair Sloan, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, I understand you can get the sample size, but do you also randomize the bus routes? Because it seems like the easy way to do the survey would be to reach the sample size by just staying on Colfax, Broadway, Alameda. So how do you get to other parts of town and make sure you're getting different types of riders?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Director Sloan, we use the ridership of the system to help us identify where we need to be surveying. So if most of your, if 3% of your ridership comes on a particular route, that's where we're going to do about 3% of the surveys. So it's based on where your customers are, and that allows us to make sure we're not, with the Transpro team and the leadership team, we're not picking and choosing where we want to survey, where we don't want to survey. We let the data tell us where we need to be surveying to make sure that we're reaching the entire service area, a sample of the entire service area.
It's important to note, I'll add to Christopher's comment. So we do, in a statistically valid way, allocate surveys by routes. We also do it by day parts. So we will equal a certain percentage of interviews in morning rush and evening rush tied to the percentage of customers during that time, as well as mid part of the days as well. So all of those are tied to a system of which we don't get to have an opinion around. The data decides how many surveys we need in each place.
Great answers. Thank you very much.
Does that take care of everything for you, Vice Chair Sloan?
It does.
Thank you. And thanks for that question. Very good question.
Moving to the sampling methodology for the community value survey, we use a third-party call center that allow of the total population, and we weight the data based on the gender and age to represent the community demographics. So we use the independent study, the American Community Survey of 2019, 5-year estimates for the Denver area, and we use the sample size population to reweight that data. So that way you have a better understanding of what the entire population believes. So on the community value survey side, it's all focused on, we use an independent nationally recognized third-party call center, and they reach out to community members. So that, again, this is a random sampling. We make sure we define the service area or the population area correctly, and then they reach out to the customer or to the community member, to the investor, and then they're offered the survey at that point. We do have a quality assurance process in place, both for the customer excellence surveys and the community value survey, to make sure that we have valid results. We also have systems in place that allow us to really make sure that we disqualify any incomplete or unacceptable responses. And when I say unacceptable, I don't mean what we want the answer to be. I mean that if there are things such as straight lining a customer or a community surveyor has gone all the way down on a particular answer, generally we will weed those out. Additionally, another example is unrealistic completion time. So if we estimate the survey to be 6 to 8 minutes, if it only takes 2, we're going to look a lot more closely at that survey to ensure its validity and go from there. So we do have a quality assurance process in place. Once we've done the sampling and the execution, so we've actually gone on the buses, on the vehicles, we've called the paratransit customers, and our third-party call center has conducted the survey with the community, we get to the results and recommendations. So here, and after we made sure that we have that quality data, we move to the final step where we provide actionable results to the management team to make those operational improvements. We look at existing trends. We identify what was most important to the customers and the community separately based on each survey. And we start to show where can the agency move forward? Where can it increase its NPS score or its customer satisfaction or community value compared to what the customer or the community respectively found most important? And so as we think about establishing the benchmarks in this initial survey, how do we begin to think about making improvements to increase those outcomes? So as the board is focused on those outcomes that you've identified in the strategic plan, what is the management team going to focus on operationally to make changes to positively impact those outcomes in the strategic plan that the board is so passionate about? What I'd like to do on the next several slides is show you an example of another agency. So these are not RTD numbers, they're not RTD, it's not RTD data, but it's really an example for you all to see what you as the board and the management team will see as a result of this.
Christopher, can I stop you here real quick? I just want to ask if there's any questions so far up to this part of the presentation. No hands raised? Thanks. Go right ahead. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the NPS, and as you can see here, this particular agency, which is a real agency, they had particularly high promoters. Their customers are passionate about their service. They love it. And you can see they have relatively few detractors. That results in, quite honestly, an industry-leading Net Promoter Score of 53%. You can see that's compared to the sampled average of 34%. This is the slide that you as board members will focus on. So as you think about what's most important for you all to keep track of, this is it. This is the one of the slides that is most important for you to be keenly aware of and keenly focused on. The management team will focus on the next several slides. In this particular agency, the customers identified, we asked the customers to rank their most important elements of service. What are your top 3 elements of service? This particular agency focused on the customers identified frequency, hours of operation, and travel time as the most important factors, the most important elements of service. So and you'll see this on the next slide, but as we think about what's going to drive the NPS, what's going to drive that Net Promoter Score up, it's going to be focusing on what's on the left side of the screen. If the management team is focused on the trip planning tools and making sure that they're offering detour notifications real time, that's great, that's good, but it's not going to move the needle. It's what's focused, because the customers have said clearly, far and away, the 3 most important things for this management team to focus on are the frequency, the hours of operation, and the travel time. So it really allows the opportunity for the management team and ultimately the board to say, the customer says this is the most important thing. Let's focus on this to increase our Net Promoter Score, our customer satisfaction, and our community value.
Chris, really have you pause there. Director Deshell, do you have a question, please?
Yeah, and this is more of a, probably asking for your anecdotal advice, or maybe Ms. Johnson has answers as well, but those 3 in particular, more so frequency and hours of operation, cost real dollars. Right? You can't consult or reorganize your way, I don't think, to more hours of operation without more money, or more frequency without more money. Maybe you can with shifting operators and recruiting and retaining operators. It's all interrelated. But I ask that to say, so it's these 3 things. Okay, the budget reality is we can't. We do not have enough operators to increase frequency or increase hours of operation. How do we continue to move forward as opposed to just, what is the next step, knowing that there's real budgetary constraints here?
So if I may, Mr. Chairman. So Director Deshell, from my past experience, what I would offer up, we see what the top importance factors are. And basically, when we look to manage our service delivery model, we basically utilize the opinions, perception, and attitudes of the respondents to help make informed decisions. So recognizing you called out some elements, there could be some factors we do that could be cost saving, right? So from my experience at a different property, there's travel time. We could interline some routes in certain areas that may not have the requisite number of boardings per revenue hour. So there's a lot of different things creatively that could be done relative to delving a little deeper in relationship to what's happening. And to the point that Christopher has raised, there's different waves as we go forward. So hours of operation, what does that really mean in reference to what it is we're putting forward? There could be follow-ons and there could be other techniques that we leverage. In past experiences, I did, mystery customer rides in reference to garnering a better perspective of what we could be doing through the eyes of a third party who's giving direction or information directly to me and the management team about their experiences. So everything isn't cut and dry in reference to being black or white. There's shades of gray when you look at these different factors holistically.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. And go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the only thing I would add to that is these are examples of an agency. For RTD, the answers could be on-time performance, bus cleanliness, and safety, right? So some items are certainly easier to implement change on from a management team and a decision-making perspective, and not just a monetary route service changes. Some things are. So I just want to make sure I made that clear that there are some distinctions based on the different agencies and where the customers identify the priority.
I think it'll be fascinating to Director Deshell's comment. There's one community, a large community, where we've worked for a number of years, and the number 2 metric that drives their customer satisfaction, it's unwavering, it hasn't moved in 5 years, is the fare price. And it's the only community that we see fare price being one of the top elements of customer satisfaction. And what that tells the board and the management team is fares just have to be off the table as they think about how to handle their financial position, because it's such a critical driver of customer satisfaction. So this will tell us, once we establish the first several waves, no, we shouldn't lock in on what the first wave tells us, but after we have several waves of data, we'll have a clear understanding of what are the most important elements to drive customer satisfaction uniquely to your customer.
Thanks, Mark. And Director Cook, before I go to you, I have a quick question. So obviously some of the things that scored lower in the middle, safety on the bus and bus cleanliness are important factors. How do you tell whether the score is low because people don't care, or the score is low because the buses are clean and safe?
Director Busick, that's a great question. So what we're not showing as a part of this in this example are the results of the customer's actual satisfaction with these areas. So in this case, bus cleanliness, over the last year and a half or so, almost every agency has been hyper-focused, hyper-aware on ensuring that buses are clean and safe, largely around bus cleanliness. And so I don't know the numbers off the top. For this agency, they might have extremely high marks in customer satisfaction, around bus cleanliness. So as you think about what's most important, it could be that those areas are scored lower, as well as it just may not be an issue. So in this case, trip planning tools, they might have a system in place that works, and it's just not going to move the needle on what the management team needs to do to make improvements there. It's where the priority of the customer, they say, these are the 3 things that are most important to us. If you want us to like your service more and be more willing to recommend it, then these are the things we want to see you make improvements on.
One more piece to add to that, Mr. Chair, which I think will specifically speak to your point, is when you begin to look at the crosstabs here, we didn't take you to this level of depth for this presentation, sure, but as you look at the crosstabs, clearly someone ranked bus cleanliness as one of the most important parts of their experience. Clearly someone rated trip planning, tools in regards to this. we'll be able to see their level of satisfaction, their net promoter score with those topics that they specifically ranked as important to them. This just takes everyone in a statistically valid way to be able to drive satisfaction of all of your customers, but you're able to pull these apart and look at crosstabs for each of these.
Got it. So the underlying data is going to give us more insight as to why we have these scores. Okay. Director Cook, you're up.
Thanks, everybody. And I'm running around, bagging veggies. So forgive me for not being present all the time. But a quick question that kind of pulls in what Marjorie Sloan had talked about, but also this recent question from Bobby Deshell. If in effect, we're sampling some routes more heavily because they have higher ridership. And I think for those routes that she talked about, it's pretty significant. So it feels like it would have the effect of weighting the views or the concerns or the priorities of the people along that route. Do you then implement the improvements targeted to those areas, or do you implement it across the board, General Manager?
Thank you very much, Director Cook. So to the point that both Christopher and Mark raised, it's looking at the cross tabulation to make an informed decision. And so this could also generate further exploration by us with a targeted approach to garner a better understanding of what that may be. So it's contingent upon the type of information we receive. And more so what I will share in my past experiences, when we saw something with certain routes, we could actually do a targeted approach to that specific route or line to garner a better understanding of what might we do for that customer segment, recognizing that we have a vast demographic area in which we serve relative to the service area being 2,342 square miles. While it's broad and it's unwieldy, there's different demographics associated with such. So to the point that was raised, for example, when the Transpro team alluded to the one transit property that has great fares. When we look at our fare study and equity analysis, and I use that, we'll be doing some exploration as it relates to what might work across the board. So compounded with all this information, we can then tune into what may be best for our customer segments relative to what we glean from this experience here. And specifically, as we speak about the certain waves, we want to ensure that we're improving aspects going along so we can heighten that customer experience and then netting a better promoter score. But in turn, we have to do some more in-depth analysis about the perceptions and attitudes. And there's different elements we could use. Mystery customers, we could use telephone town halls and things of the like as we go forward. So this isn't the one all be all. It gives us a snapshot about what we might do to enhance the service collectively. Does that address your question?
It does. And since I've got the floor, Mr. Chair, can I ask one other quick question about?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
When you're doing every fourth person, are they within earshot of the driver? I mean, I don't know what psychological effect it might have if they know they are saying, oh, it's a crappy service or it's a great service. Is that influenced by being in the presence of a driver they may see every day? I mean,
I will yield the floor to Chris, but keeping in mind there's different elements with the intercepts. They could be on a station platform. You could be on a light rail vehicle, a commuter rail car where an operator is within a cab, or, recognizing we have bus operators as well. It's contingent upon that, but I'll yield the floor to the expert that has more in-depth experience as opposed to me just having experience from the periphery. Chris?
Thank you, Madam CEO and Mr. Chairman. Director Cook, so we ask our surveyors to move throughout the vehicle. So there may be an occasion where if in a bus that the surveyor is within earshot of a driver, I believe, Madam CEO Johnson, that I think your drivers have the safety shields. And so that provides a layer of separation, if you will. So there is a potential for that. However, in all of the agencies that we've done this before, we make sure the operators are aware that these surveyors are on the vehicles, and we've not had complaints from customers taking the survey or from operators about there being an issue. So certainly if there is an uncomfort level with being too close to an operator, we would ask that customer to shift or something. We would make accommodations for that.
In other words, you don't think it's influencing the answers in any significant way. Okay, great. Thank you.
Does that take care? That's it. Great. I just have a quick follow-up. So when we're doing these surveys on our conveyances, is there any chance we can post notices that say we're doing a survey? We'd really love for you to participate, so that you don't want to do that. Okay, tell me why.
So the reason we don't do that is because we want to make sure we're reaching out to the customer. So by having that every fourth customer, it eliminates the opportunity for bias. So if I'm a surveyor and Mark and Miss Johnson were to get on the vehicle together, and one of them, Miss Johnson, was the fourth customer that's on my list, I'm only going to ask questions to Miss Johnson. I am not going to ask Mr. Ash his questions. If he would like to respond through her, I guess that's okay. But the point is, they both don't get to take the survey. It's one survey, it's one response, and then the next fourth person. So there's only one survey. So we want to make sure that we are approaching the customer. That is key in making sure that we eliminate that bias.
Yeah,
right. I get that, but I think my point was not that you get odd answers, but that you validate that the person on the bus is a legitimate surveyor that is working with RTD. That's the only reason I wondered if you notice that RTD's conducting a customer satisfaction survey. You may see people on the bus. They are legitimate, that kind of a thing.
I think that's a great point, Mr. Chairman, and we certainly use identification badges for those surveyors.
Yeah.
We'll work with Ms. Johnson to ensure that the right notices and they're wearing the right things to make sure customers know who they are.
I could imagine the cost getting out of hand if you put them.
Right, and if I could, Mr. Chair, as I said before, having done something similar, there is a way in which we could be highly communicative, because going forward, apprising people, but I can see the point that's been raised. We don't want this to be biased. We want to ensure that we're receiving true data that's reflective of our ridership going forward, and recognizing there's always a chance for anything to happen. In my experience being in this space, at least with surveying of this magnitude over the past 10, 15 years, I've never had that encountered. But there is a way that we could have conversations. I would not support noticing on the vehicle, but ensuring that we have our personnel that's apprised, i.e. through service delivery, that we will have individuals on the buses and things of the like. So thank you very much for that question.
Yeah, thanks so much. Director Cook, are you done? Your hand's still up. I think she is. Director Catlin, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious what ridership numbers you'll be using. And the reason for my question is because most of the routes in my region were eliminated due to COVID. And so I believe that the area that I represent would not really factor into this survey because they haven't had any routes, even though they were low ridership routes. I just was curious what year you're going to be using as your baseline for ridership.
Mr. Chairman, Director Catlin, that's a great question. We're working with your data team now to pull the information. Right now, we're planning to use recent data. So we're using the month of June for 2021. We want to make sure we have an understanding of who the customer is today. Certainly understand that if you're in an area that has been impacted by COVID, this is a baseline, right? So that we're capturing the snapshot of the ridership today. We know in the future, as the agency conducts another customer satisfaction survey, that will be a new baseline, or it'll be a new survey, right? So there may be a slightly different modification based on service changes and the like. So we survey based on the ridership that's in place to make sure that we're talking to real customers.
Well, for the record, that means that my district will have 0 representation on the survey.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, Director Catlin, thank you very much for your comment. But as we talk more specifically, recognizing that we do have the community value, the investors as well, that's another component, recognizing the understanding of the services that we provide. And this will garner additional input that will be helpful to us about the perceptions, opinions, and attitudes of the service that we deploy throughout the entire district, because from that could spawn the need to say, oh, well, what I do know about the service is I don't have any service in this area. So that will in turn allow us to delve more deeply. So there are two different approaches in which we can garner feedback from the district-wide.
And I understand that, and I recognize that prior to posing my question and my rather snarky response. But I think that there are a number of the factors that you've listed here that I've received feedback in the past from my constituents that they're not going to have an opportunity to comment on now. So that it's just a comment for the record, and I understand that next year there'll be another opportunity since some service will be reinstated in September. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Director Catlin. No further questions right now. So Christopher, if you could continue, that'd be great.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So just as a follow-up to the previous slides where the board's focused on the outcome of the Net Promoter Score, the management team sees what's most important to the customer. And this slide is really designed for the management team to really be thinking about what's going to move that needle to increase the Net Promoter Score. So I just want to orient you to the slide a little bit. You can see on the x-axis is the importance, the weighted report importance ranking of the factors. On the y-axis, the vertical axis, it's the satisfaction. So Director Busick, as you were asking a question about, well, how do they actually perform in bus cleanliness? You can see here, looking for L, this particular agency, it was a low priority, and it's up in that upper left quadrant of it's nice to have. So they had a bus cleanliness satisfaction of, looks like about 83%. That's pretty good. So it's a nice to have, right? It's a low priority, so it doesn't really matter. Whereas the management team is really focused on that bottom left quadrant, the areas of opportunity, because they know that the things that are most important but have the lowest satisfaction, those are the things that are those are the items, the elements of service that are going to drive the increase in customer satisfaction and the Net Promoter Score. So again, as the board thinks about the Net Promoter Score, the management team looks at this and says, okay, we want to increase that Net Promoter Score and overall satisfaction. These are the areas that we need to focus on. It may not be a 1 month change, right? To Director Deshell's point, it might be changing the hours of operation might be a bigger lift. It might take a longer term approach, but it's thinking about what are we going to do to positively impact the NPS and overall customer satisfaction. We'd just like to quickly take you through a timeline of the process that we've discussed. The agency, the board of directors adopted the strategic plan on August 10th. At your direction, the CEO and general manager has implemented information systems for 2 of the success outcome areas, strategic priority areas of customer excellence and community value. We'll be on site the week of September 7th to conduct the customer excellence survey for fixed route and rail. We'll also be conducting the paratransit survey that week. In mid-September, we'll be working with our call center vendor to conduct the community value survey and present the results to the management team the week of October 25th. Ultimately, what this leads is the establishment of baseline today so that there's time to begin making changes. Ultimately, as the board and the management team decides to measure again next year and the frequency that you choose next year, allows you to begin to measure against your baseline that we're establishing today and begin making improvements based on that. So again, I want to make sure that we're clear. This is a progression or an outflow of the strategic plan, the information systems to develop and define the outcomes as the board identified, using these data points allows us to set the baseline today to work on improvements as we move forward. And as you begin to think about measuring your CEO, general manager against these items and the items in the strategic plan over the next year.
Christopher, can I stop you real quick? I've got a question. The community value survey, is that performed telephonically?
Yes, sir. It's both telephone and web panel.
Okay, so I know we've had this problem in the past with our telephone town halls in that there's some kind of a issue that we only use landlines, and because no one has a landline. Is that an issue here or not?
No, sir. We'll use both cell landlines and the web panel.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Chair Rivera-Malpitti, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You made me think of something. On all of these, will these also be available in different languages?
Yes, ma'am. We've been working with your I'm going to get the name wrong, but your
Transit equity, if I may, Chris. Madam Chair, we have basically linked Transpo up with our transit equity manager. For certain, we're looking at Spanish.
Okay.
I'm looking at having them assess, and Carl's going to double back. We didn't get that information in time for this presentation to leverage any other safe harbor language that has the percentage that would warrant us going further. So right now for certain English and Spanish, and prior to this commencing, we'll have more in-depth information relative to any other language that are germane for the demographic.
All right, thank you. I guess,
Madam Chair, we can't hear you.
You're cutting in and out, Angie.
Sign language or TTY, just to make sure up here. Is this better?
Yes, it is. And to the point that you raised, Madam Chair, that goes into our language assistant program, which is part of Title VI, hence my comments as it relates to them linking up with our transit equity manager to make that determination as we go forward, because we do leverage those services when necessary across the board. So in the absence of having Carl Green present, I can share with you that that is the direction in which I provided to the Transpro team just last week when we met.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Great question. Great question, Madam Chair. Thanks. Director Cook, your hand's back up.
Yes,
Back
thank you. And I had hoped to wait through the end to see if my question was answered, but I've got to get going here. So we are using these surveys for a couple of different reasons. We're using them to drive performance excellence, and then also it's directly linked to our evaluation of the GM CEO and her salary. And because of that, I think that so that there wouldn't be any question that it was all above board, we've asked for greater board engagement. So along those lines, in terms of the community.
Director Cook, we lost you.
Blame Freddie. He's all over the keyboard.
Okay.
So
in terms of
yeah,
we lost you.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a way that we can get copies or we can preview the questions, especially for community value, because that's a piece that is more, I don't know, subjective, I guess, or values laden. It's not a matter of having some pretty well-defined and accepted metrics that define customer excellence. It's more a matter of local priority or regional goals and so forth, as well as what the agency hopes to provide as a benefit to the community. So I'm just for the purposes of making sure people can't criticize this process as being, out of the purview of the board, that the board has appropriate engagement on it. Can you provide us with the questions, allow the GMOC to have some input into those?
Mr. Chair, I think that question is better suited for me as opposed to the consultant, and I would defer to you if that's the desire of the collective body, recognizing that the surveys holistically are being generated based upon the data that we have that is indigenous to this organization.
Yeah,
and the timeline before us, I would yield to you all recommend referencing what we did relative to the timeline. So
No, I understand.
I'm not certain if I really understand the question regarding what we've done holistically in relationship to the strategic plan and the other exercises that we have undertaken. So I will yield to you all.
Sure. Sure. And I had mentioned this earlier on. I would love to see some of these questions. And I think what Director Cook is getting at, just to ensure that, you know, people looking at us from the outside can say, yeah, the board was involved in this. I do not want this to interfere with our timeline, because the timeline is critical. But if there's any chance we can get those survey questions just to look at them, you know, and so we can tell people that the survey doesn't consist of questions that say, do you love RTD or would you rather be poked in the eye with a stick? I mean, you know, we'd like to be able to say, we've looked at these, we've digested them, we agree they look good. So if that's possible, I would support that request by Director Cook. Director Cook, do you have anything further?
Yeah, it really is to protect you as well, Deborah, because I think we don't, you know, if it was purely your performance management system, that's your purview. That's all in your control. But if it remains in your control and is what is used to set your salary, I think that creates a perception of a problem, potentially. I don't want to leave you open to that kind of an illusion. So I just want to make sure we're seen to be doing this in a way that's appropriate, given the dollars, given the salary setting, and the fact that this is the board's evaluation of you as well. So thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Director
much, Director Cook. And I would just say, as it relates to that, please recognize my comments. Recognizing you're one member of 15, I was yielding to the chairman to see what the direction was of the body. And I do recognize that there will be a classification and compensation analysis as it relates to the position in which I hold. So as I was saying, relative to the timeline, if it is the desire of this body to have those questions, so be it. I appreciate the earnest and open dialogue relative to protecting me. So with that, I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Thanks. Director Deshell.
Yeah, I actually, I think it's one thing for us to look at the questions. I think it's another thing for us to opine on them and edit and approve them or not approve them. I think that looking at them for our own situational awareness, so that we're not caught flat-footed when someone says, "Have you seen this survey?" Absolutely, totally fine. When we get into our management of these survey questions, to me that goes beyond the scope of the board. And frankly, that I have concern about, you know, if someone were to release the survey, you know, is there a concern about the validity of the survey, right? If we were to release all the questions out into the world, right? And what does all that look like? So I don't necessarily agree that we should be so involved in the survey questions versus just seeing them. And maybe that's not the intent here, but I would caution us on becoming statisticians and surveyors.
Great. Thanks for those comments. Chair Rivera-Melchietti.
Thank you. I'm turning my camera off so that you can hear me. I want to thank Director Deshell. I cannot agree with you more. I think you know, to look at the survey questions is one thing, but that is not our area of expertise. That's why we hire outside folks to help us put together the best data-driven kinds of questions. They're the experts, and we work from there. So I absolutely agree. If the board feels like they need to look at it to feel more comfortable, that's one thing, but we'll have to do it on a very, very short timeline because we have too much work to get done in a short period of time. But I absolutely agree. We should not be delving into any kind of edit or any of those things.
Great. Thanks for those comments. Vice Chair Sloan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair Busick. I am interested in whether or not these questions will be specifically crafted to RTD, particularly the community value issues. For instance, the Denver metro area is a non-attainment area on ozone, so people are very conscious of climate change and sustainability. I know not every area, according to Mark at our retreat, you know, is that focused on sustainability, but the Denver area is. So, you know, I don't think we should be editing the questions, but we might comment on the content and on the targets of the questions. You're specifically getting the right survey population, but if you're not asking the right questions, the answers won't be that valuable for Denver.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Director Sloan, we certainly use a broad benchmark list of questions for the majority of our questions. There are others where we are actually reaching out to community leaders in Denver, and we have one-on-one sessions with them to help us identify what are the key areas that the community sees as value and where RTD could improve, or they're doing, where is RTD already doing well? So we use that to help us form the specific questions for the Denver community as well. So from the TransPro side, and I'll let CEO Johnson respond if she would like in a moment, we use that benchmarking questions across the board so there's clarity on what we're asking with input from some of those community members to ensure we're asking things that are relevant to the community as well.
Thank you. I just
Vice Chair Stone, yeah, and that's a great question because it is a big deal in the Denver metro area, and we are a non-attainment area, and greenhouse gas emissions are a real problem, and transit is a big solution. Who's up next? Chair Rivera-Malfetti, your hand's still up. Good. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Chair. I could not agree more with Directors Deshell and Chair Rivera-Malfetti. We are not experts in survey instruments, and I just wanted to reiterate my appreciation for those comments. But I also recognize Director Sloan's concern about having some questions that are particularly tailored to this community, and you all answered to my satisfaction about your outreach to the community leaders. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Director Catlin. Director Deshell.
I apologize, back. I know we had discussed a third-party validation or peer review or audit of whatever language is used for someone else validating the results of the survey. Do we have an RFP out or RFQ or RFI or whatever is appropriate? And what is our plan to make sure that piece also gets done? Because I know that came up a lot on our retreat. And I am satisfied personally, but I know that it's important to other directors as well. Piece of survey validation.
Yeah, Director Deshell, that's next on the agenda. So I think we'll be talking about that a little bit more in just a minute.
Great.
If that's okay. Any other questions or comments with regard to the getting the questions out to the board? And I guess I'd have a question for General Counsel Snyder. And one of the comments that was raised was that, and I think it might have been Director Deshell, that does releasing the questions ahead of time impact the validity of the survey? And if so, the question that I would have to our General Counsel is that, can we mark these as confidential and request the board not disseminate them as we do other confidential matters?
Mr. Chair, so I'll defer to the experts on whether there's any impact on the validity or outcomes of the survey in doing that, but I think that there are options to be able to protect those documents, particularly when they're in draft form. As one example, we have the ability under provisions related to elected official work product when things are in draft form. So that's just one example of a potential basis to protect that information.
Okay. No, your microphone is you're warbling, I guess. Yeah, but I guess I'll just leave it at this. If there's any way we can mark the questions as confidential in some fashion to help protect their dissemination, I think we should just go ahead.
So Mr. Chair, I will work and ensure that happens in reference to getting those out to you in a timely fashion, recognizing that we are targeting our kickoff date soon. And we will work expeditiously to disseminate that and work with council so we can protect the work product to ensure that this is a valid survey. Thank
Great.
you.
Appreciate it. Christopher, was there anything more you had on your presentation?
No, sir, that's it. I appreciate your time and your questions. Looking forward to continuing this process and working with your leadership team and ultimately to provide you the results.
Great, and thanks to you and the team for the presentation. So as I alluded to in my prior comment, next on our agenda is the GM survey validation plan. Who will be presenting on that?
So, Mr. Chair, if I can ask for a point of clarification, because as I shared with some others, I saw it said General Manager Survey Validation Plan, and I'm slightly confused by that topic. When we had discussed previously, we were going to go through the Net Promoter Score and talk about how that information is compiled. We're looking at a baseline as we go forward and recognizing that we have contracted with Transfo for a limited period of time. Getting to Director Deshell's question, we have our internal staff that's on this call from a market research perspective that has been working in tandem. Typically in this realm, utilizing third-party entities in reference to what Christopher has outlined in the presentation, we're creating a baseline going forward. And as we look at validation and leveraging any type of solicitation, that would come out of RTD to garner a different element relative to having resources on hand to complete that going forward. So I think I'm seeking from you clarification in reference to what it is with this item C regarding the validation plan as it relates to the general manager.
Sure. I recall at one of our retreats, there was discussion about a third-party validation of the survey. I think Director Deshell talked about it as well. And the thinking being that we're happy with TransPro doing all this work, but it might make sense to have a third party look at the results, validate them as appropriate and statistically valid. So
okay, so with that as the backdrop, what I did ask Transpro at a high level to talk about recognizing that they may not be the entity to do this, but to frame it for everybody so they understand. But when Director Deshell asked, do we have a solicitation in place? No, we do not, because it was the direction of this body early on when we talked about creating a baseline that we would go down this route. But it is my intent, I will say, in this forum, ultimately recognizing that we do have some gaps to create a bench whereby we have these things readily available if we need performance management, project management, things of the like that we would have that we could issue on a task order basis. So with that as a backdrop, Mark, I don't know if you all are prepared to speak at a high level about third-party validation.
Sure, happy to share thoughts and I think as we've talked about at the retreat, Mr. Chair, is with a number of our clients that have outcomes by which they are evaluating their CEO's performance, and even more so when there is compensation tied to those results. By definition, if only the management team presents the results of those outcomes, there's a conflict that's built in, right? They are, by definition, presenting the results of those outcomes of which there is compensation that's directly connected to that. What we have found for most of those boards in particular is they benefit from a third party validating that those outcomes are indeed true, that the customer satisfaction score really is whatever it's presented as, that the financial results truly are what they are presented as, that the employee engagement score is added up to exactly what management has presented it as. So we do that for a number of our clients, and happy to have conversation if that makes sense here. You could certainly think about an accounting firm. You could certainly think about a law firm, potentially. I think the key point is that it's in the board's interest and really in the management team's interest to ensure that a third party has validated those outcomes at the end of the year as being true and actual.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the discussion, and my recollection of our discussion on this topic is that we were thinking a third party might be better than having TransPro validate their own results. It might give it a little more credibility and separate you from that and not have people raising any kind of questions. My understanding was that that was what we were going to do when we had the results. Any other directors want to weigh in on this? Is this what the GMOC would want to have happen? So let's weigh in on that. I'll ask that question. Vice Chair Sloan.
Yes, I believe you correctly summarized some statements that were made at the retreat, that there was concern about validating a survey conducted by the same party.
So would you be in favor of retaining a third party independent to validate the survey results?
I would. I believe it's a more conservative approach.
Director Deshell.
Also in favor, and I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that should we be in favor within the committee, it'll go to the board to decide whether they are in favor.
Yep.
Yeah, I would be in favor, certainly at least for the first. I don't know that you need to validate multiple times, but certainly at least the first outset.
First time around, sure. Director Bouquet?
Yeah, I think it would be a safe option and I would be in favor of it.
Great. Chair Rivera Malpiedi?
Yeah, you know what? I also would be in favor of it. And I think that, you know, the other thing I keep going back to is that we are doing this process. It's unprecedented the way that we've gone to this point with a strategic plan that has been really open and inclusive and transparent. So it does make sense to do it on this. So I am okay for this to go to the board to have to make sure that they're okay with that as well. I think it does cover everybody, and I think that that's not a bad thing to do. But we're setting the basics for going forward. So I think that that's really important to state that we're doing a lot of things for the first time under this general manager's leadership, and so I just want to make sure that that's on the record. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Director Callen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recall, as did Director Sloan, that this was raised at the retreat, but I don't believe there was consensus among the board. So I would be comfortable with having a neutral third party validate the results and then for this first go around. But I also am in favor of having that and then having this committee take it to the board for concurrence.
Great. I appreciate it. So it sounds like consensus, Madam General Manager, from the General Manager Oversight Committee to get this moving through the process to get it before the board. Is that something you all can take care of?
Yes, sir. And I would say, yes, I will defer to Ms. McManus in reference to agendizing this going forward appropriately, since there's no recommended action coming. It was no recommended action that was agendized. So I would assume that we would have to bring this back to this committee and then basically take it out of this committee and forward on to the board. But
Great.
yes,
So
I support what you all have said. I'm just
Okay.
clarifying in reference to our, parliamentary procedure aspect, because this is not agendized. So this action wouldn't stand. That's my only.
No, I understand. So
Okay.
we've got a meeting scheduled for September 2nd. We talked about whether we're going to have a need for that or not. We have a need for it now. So let's get that on the agenda for September 2nd. Great.
Not that I want to skip procedure, but could we also just do a director with the five of us who are on the committee signing on to a director action that just goes on, and that everyone doesn't have to be here on the 2nd? Not that I don't enjoy spending Thursday afternoon with you all, but
Yeah, so the question is, can we do a board initiated action item and not have it come out of a committee? Is that that doable?
Well, yes, but it still should come through a committee at some point, unless we were going to have a special board meeting, which we don't have scheduled.
Yeah, no, I understand what Director Shell's trying to do. He's trying to get out. He's trying not to have us meet on the 2nd for one issue. But I think it's probably better procedurally to do it the standard method to come through committee, if that's okay. But I like the idea. Always thinking.
all good. Yeah, just trying to think creatively here.
No, that's good. Okay, so we're good on that. Ms. McManus?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Let's move on. Compensation analysis overview. Who's presenting on that?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to do so.
Okay.
Can you all hear
Hopefully-
me? I left and came back. Did that make any difference?
It's an
No, you're-
echo. It's an
you're
echo,
still-
Melanie.
it's like you cut in and out, and maybe get closer to your computer.
Right,
Closer.
yeah, choked up on it.
Closer.
Yeah, I've been in meetings on this all day and haven't had any mic issues, but hopefully you can hear me now. On a high level, as you may recall, the board did adopt a third amendment to the contract with the general manager and CEO that included a provision that would require that RTD will engage a third party through a competitive solicitation to conduct a compensation and benchmarking analysis. And then that would be used by the board going forward to set the GM and CEO's base salary and incentive compensation starting in January 2023. So I will be working with staff to put together the solicitation statement of work documents. Of course, we're not going to go into detail on those parameters here in this public forum, but I will be consulting with you, Chair Busick, and certainly as we've discussed, my understanding is that Chair Busick will be participating on that selection panel to ensure that the board does have a voice in that selection as it is made based on the established solicitation criteria. And then we'll aim at having that selection and hopefully a contract in place by the end of this year. So that should allow plenty of time for the analysis as well as for the board to review that analysis. And so we're ready to go, or you all are ready to go in 2023.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for the update. Are there any questions for General Counsel Snyder on that? Great, thanks, Melanie. That's terrific.
You're welcome.
Moving on. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, gotcha. Okay. So moving down the agenda, other matters. Are there any other matters to come before this committee? Seeing none, our next meeting date, September 2nd, 2021, 3 p.m. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Who would like to adjourn? We are adjourned, unanimous consent. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mark and your team. Thanks, Deborah, and all of your peeps. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate the